Good evening. It's good to see you. I'm glad you could stop and take a break with me. I'm enjoying a quiet evening at home and didn't really have very much going on, so I'll probably sit here once you leave. I'll sit here and read a book and enjoy some dessert. I'm particularly enjoying this mug. So this is a mug from the company that creates this magazine subscription that I mentioned in our last visit, Hearth and Field. Apparently they had some binding equipment on the fritz, and so the quarterly edition that I assume I was supposed to get weeks ago was delayed significantly, and about 2 weeks ago I received in the mail a box with one of their mugs with some of their branding on it. It says Field. On here they have other mugs that say Hearth. And I've just been enjoying that as kind of my go-to beer mug for the last couple weeks since I got it, actually, I guess. And then only a matter of days ago I received the quarterly edition for this quarter. So I can only assume, because I didn't order that mug, I can only assume they sent it as, an apology, hey, sorry this is taking so long. So that, of course, is not a surprise and a huge advantage of doing business with a company that treasures personal relationships and just real life and that sort of thing. They didn't include a correspondence or a note or anything like that in it. It was just like, hey, this guy has had to wait a little bit longer, and so let's send him something to tide him over. And it did tide me over sufficiently. So we talked about it last time, but I can't recommend Hearth and Field enough. If you're looking for a good subscription, everything in it appeals to both me and my wife, and we have very different tastes. We have very different reading habits. It appeals to both of us, and the quality is just top notch. So if you're looking for one, I highly encourage you to use that. So what I was thinking about, and I've been meditating on this for the last couple weeks, not very long, but I was thinking about how I use my free time, particularly how I use it now, and then also how I've used it in the past. And this is a specific example, but you'll be able to see the kind of the underlying point I'm trying to make. And I wanted to kind of talk about what happened when I stopped playing video games. So to preface, I think until about the age of 11, we really didn't have any video games ever growing up. And we even had one of those, for the longest time, we had one of those TVs that you had to switch on. It wasn't a button, it was a switch. And the screen takes forever to actually turn on. And it was funny, I was just thinking last night, man, it'd be nice to have one of those again. Maybe get rid of the flat screen we have and get something like that. That's probably too much. But for a good portion of my middle school and high school years, and even post graduating, not a ton, but I regularly indulged in video games and enjoyed it. And I have a fairly nuanced opinion on video games. I'm related to kind of people on both sides of the spectrum. I have relatives who they're adult men, older than I am, and they play video games regularly, and that's one of their hobbies and how they spend their free time. And I have other people who think really at any age, honestly, you probably shouldn't play video games, and they're probably harmful in some way, shape, or form, and you'd be better served doing something else anyway. But I actually have a fairly nuanced opinion on it. I don't see any substantial difference between video games and, say, watching television show, or streaming, or just looking at your phone, that sort of thing, which is funny because some of the people who say, well, you shouldn't really play video games, also, never miss their favorite TV show. So anyway, I say that just to say that, particularly since I started having children, but even more recently, I just kind of thought, you know what, I think I'm done. It was kind of losing its allure, and I also just felt like, you know what, to play video games, I have to sacrifice time reading, I have to sacrifice time spending time with my wife or children, or, it's just not worth it anymore. And one of the very tangible reasons that I stopped was because I was working on, as you know, this poetic project, The Griffin. I tried my hand at writing something of it's shorter, but something of an epic poem. And it's really kind of my first dip into what I would like to think is serious poetry. And what I found was, increasingly it became difficult to write and really sit down and get into writing this poem regularly when I was still playing video games. And what I would also find is, when you lose the opportunity to just sit quietly and think, you will be shocked at how loud your thoughts get. When we're so used to constantly having outside information bombarding us, we're constantly, I am even guilty of this myself, but constantly having, if it's quiet and you're making dinner, you have the news on, or you have this really interesting talk on, and so there's just this constant noise. And what you find is, when you just sit quietly, you are actually a lot more interesting than you think. And I would have tons of ideas. I would have something come to mind, even a couple lines of poetry that would come to mind, or a poetic idea that I would want to incorporate that would come to mind. And playing video games or some other habit like that would inhibit my ability to have those ideas and to think them out clearly. So anyway, so I stopped. I think it's been probably 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4, honestly. No, it's probably closer to 3. Since I really regularly played a video game, and unsurprisingly, I don't really miss it. I'm sure they'd be fun, and I've picked up a controller for 20 minutes or something like that since then, and but it doesn't really hold me. It has kind of worn off. But what that allowed me to do, particularly with all that free time, and then also just the added creativity, is it allowed me to write this poem and kind of get it to a pretty finished condition. And of course, we've read some together. And I thought, just as an example, what better way to talk about, hey, stop doing this thing so you can do this other thing instead? What better way than to actually show you what I did because I specifically stopped playing video games. So I thought I would read some more of The Griffin, just a few lines, a few stanzas. And this takes place, again, this is the whole idea of this poem. The whole conceit is that it's an account of Lancelot's, he has a dream vision, this is in the strain of a medieval allegory, which often take, Pierce Plowman, The Divine Comedy, there's this element, is this a dream? Is this a vision? Like, what's happening? And so this takes place when Lancelot gets himself in his dream vision. He gets himself to a place where he just really needs help. He is stuck and trapped, and I don't want to give any more away, actually. But he's at the bottom of the barrel. And he is somehow freed, and he gets out of, all of this takes place in a deep cavern, and he finally makes his way out, and this is where we pick up. At last, to long-awaited light, I shuffled from that shadowed space, 'neath sky suffused with star and moon, whose light illumined my sallow face. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the turf in weary daze, with bleary eyes, unblinking lids, into the starry skies I gazed. I lay there like a long-dead corpse, and watched dim-witted heavens dance, with nothing near a thought for need of sweetest sleep or sustenance. A word was whispered, so I thought, whose beckoning I barely heard, the whispered words, "Awake, arise," and to my feet I then was spurred. I walked away from cavern's gate into some trees that sparsely grew, and underfoot the freshest turf was washed with midnight's wholesome dew. It was not long till other sound approached my ears but hid from sight. I knew that it could only be a swelling stream's swift onward flight. As I approached this silver stream, I noticed that a hill nearby stood fenced from me across the bank, with no dry way to cross thereby. I stood by water's edge, bewitched, entranced by that full-bodied beast, until a shape on other shore then caused heartbeat and breath to cease. For from the shade of hillside trees a shadowed thing strode down to me. At first I found I could not name, until it stood beside the stream. Of eagle's stern and august sort, its face and breast and forelegs were, while legs behind and flanking sides were cloaked with a fine golden fur. Its piercing eyes peered out at me. I could not tear my gaze away from those deep wells of ageless years. I stood before a griffin fey. So of course that's the meeting of the eponymous griffin, and from there the adventure continues, and a conversation with Lancelot and the griffin from they're standing on opposite sides of this stream. So I mean that's I've just so enjoyed, and recently I've kind of taken up one more thing with this poem. This idea came to me actually from a book that I had just read, but having something in a project like this of verisimilitude, okay, what if this, what would it look like if this was like a real poem actually written by a medieval Latin, in medieval Latin by some person in, the 12th or 13th century, and it was, they're transcribing an earlier oral tradition that supposes that Lancelot himself composes this after he has these real events occur to him. He really has this dream vision, and then he writes this poem, and it gets passed down orally, and then finally someone in the 12th century or something like that actually puts it down in medieval Latin. So, and what would that look like if I came across that manuscript and was involved in the translation into an English verse of that Latin work? And so I've written a postscript for this poem, which, well, maybe I'll just read it to you. How much time do we have? We have time. I think I'll just read it to you. Yeah, it shouldn't be too long. Okay, so this is the postscript. This kind of, again, the conceit is laid out as I just kind of explained. So anyway, I hope you like this. Please tell me if okay, I'm not quite following you, like what's going on, because this is kind of a draft. I just did this in the last week and a half or something. Okay. So this is the postscript. The truth of how I came to be involved in this matter is so peculiar that to describe in minute details the goings-on surrounding my introduction to the individual I will refer to as Dr. Sylvester, and the other great persons to whom I am now indebted, would quickly call into question my grasp on what is true and what is mythological. For indeed this whole affair has so blurred the distinction that I should never more mean by mythology what most people now mean. At the outset, I wish to confess to any who may read this translation that I am not a member of the intelligentsia. I deal in numbers, and am therefore quite naturally drawn to amateur poetics, but only in the unserious way many people engage the crossword puzzle. I have no professional language training. I know little Latin, and that is largely liturgical. Invariably, all academic effort, philological and otherwise, involved with this translation was the work of others. My sole commission was to set down, in the language and form of my choosing, a faithful English translation of the original manuscripts. The manuscript itself is a 13th century Latin composition, which itself presumes to set down an earlier oral poetic tradition originating from Lancelot himself. Or at least that is the conceit. I first became interested in Joyous Gard through my lifelong interest in the stories of King Arthur. The fact that, as De Boron, Geoffrey, and Mallory had it, these mythological locations had historical pedigrees and identifiable contemporary equivalents was fascinating. My fascination was buttressed by the sincere belief that both my maternal and paternal heredity had ties to that area of Northumberland. That belief has largely fallen to the wayside, not with the evidence to the contrary, but as greater matters have engulfed all my imaginative activity. My meeting Dr. Sylvester had all the marks of an apparent coincidence. What have an American accountant and an English PhD have in common? It was not until later that the realization was made that it was at least anticipated by friends with whom he is associated. One in particular. I realized that the term friend for most of us entails something of an equivalency, an equality of mind and being. That is precisely what I do not mean. However, the term is the best description for their nature if we properly understand what Aristotle was getting at with his friendship of virtue. This can be of help for those of us who don't instantly recognize the philological elements of a phrase Sylvester used more than once, eudaimonic. To one of these friends, my involvement seems to have served two objectives. The first, being the popular dissemination of the poetic narrative likely composed by Lancelot himself. The second, and this is merely an apprehension, is that I am believed to need this story in especial. No other reason can I conjure that would explain the use of my inexperience and almost complete obscurity. Surely someone else would be better suited to the task, would be more successful in taking up this tale. I asked this question of Sylvester once under the intense discomfort of his glittering eye. It went unanswered. I won't reveal too much of my interactions with Sylvester and his associates, as there is much that would require you to simply take me at my word. Additionally, it would draw undue attention to matters that are undoubtedly beside the point. I will provide in the form of appendices as much of my correspondence with Sylvester as deemed prudent, as well as an analysis of literary elements present in this poem that plausibly influenced other works. If nothing else, such an analysis will hopefully point readers to other great poetic works. It's enchanting. A poem lost to the laborious march of these last few centuries, only to rear its laureled head today. The theme could not be more apt for a generation bent in on itself. Incurvatus in se. Torn between a disbelief in repentance and forgiveness at all, and a fear that, when needed most, both might be out of reach. Throughout this entire experience, which is still unfinished, I have increasingly felt like an inside man, an operative within the castle under siege. Contrary to my anticipation, I don't feel any the bigger for it. I feel like a thimble filled to the brim with mercurial light, but still a thimble. The cosmos has expanded beyond the narrow horizons of Earth. I now look up at night and see into that vast celestial sea, and my eyes meet Dante's as he gazes down. hope you enjoyed that. Please give me your feedback on that. It's kind of a working idea, and I've written some of the correspondences between myself and this Dr. Sylvester. So anyway, hopefully that's evidence enough to maybe get rid of the things you do in your free time that fritter away your time in an unproductive manner. I don't mean productive as in it produces some financial or economic gain. I mean that it, sitting down and reading, or even just sitting quietly. So that's what I'm going to do now. So it was good to see you. I hope you enjoyed all that, and please feel free to correct me where I'm wrong, or agree with me where I'm right. I hope to see you again soon. Take care.